Phil Dean arrived at my kitchen table 3 weeks after my husband's funeral with an envelope, a document, and a figure. He sat down without being asked, and he placed the original life insurance policy on the table in front of me, the premarital policy, Garrett's parents named as primary beneficiaries, dated from before the wedding. He told me that Garrett had always meant for the money to come back to the family. He said it gently. He said the $310,000 was always meant to return to the family. He pushed the policy across the table toward me. He had not asked, before arriving, whether I knew what had happened to the policy in the 3 years since I had discovered that it had lapsed. He had not asked because he did not know the policy had lapsed, and he did not know the policy had lapsed because I had discovered the lapse myself within a billing cycle and had reinstated it and had filed a new beneficiary designation and had received the confirmation letter and had filed all of this in the pale green insurance binder in the farm office and had not mentioned any of it to anyone because it was a farm administrative matter. And farm administrative matters were what I managed, and there was nothing to announce. The policy Phil had placed on my table no longer existed. Good day, dear listeners. It's Lena again, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and tap the like button. It helps these stories reach the people who need them. And tell me in the comments which city you're listening from. I love seeing just how far these stories travel. Grief has a way of making people reveal themselves. Some people, when they lose someone, go quiet and careful, present in the specific way of the bereaved, who have decided that their function in the aftermath is to be available and still. Others become urgent. They begin calculating. They arrive at tables with paperwork. Phil arrived with paperwork. What the paperwork told me about Phil was not that he was calculating in the malicious sense. It told me that his grief had found a shape, and the shape was a claim. And the claim was based on a conviction he had held for years and had not tested against the current state of the record. Grief makes people reach for certainty. The certainty Phil reached for was a premarital insurance designation and a conversation he had had with Garrett at some point about the money coming back to the family. He had held these two things, and they had become the shape of his grief certainty. And he had arrived at my kitchen table 3 weeks after the funeral to act on them. Some people, when they lose someone, close inward, become quiet, careful, present. Others become urgent. They begin calculating. They begin arriving at tables with paperwork. Phil Dean arrived with paperwork. He was not a cruel man. He was a farmer who had managed this land for 40 years and who had built a set of expectations about what the farm's resources meant and where they should go. And Garrett's death had triggered those expectations before he had asked a single question about the current state of the policy. He had not asked because he had assumed he knew. In 9 years of marriage, I had managed every administrative aspect of the farm: accounts payable, insurance renewals, equipment financing, the billing cycles, and the confirmation letters and the renewal dates. And Phil had known this in the abstract without knowing what it meant in the specific instance. In the specific instance of this policy, it meant that I had caught the lapse, filed the reinstatement application, changed the beneficiary designation, and received the confirmation letter on a Thursday afternoon, while my daughter came home from kindergarten orientation. I had filed the confirmation letter in the pale green binder. The binder was in the farm office. Phil was sitting at my kitchen table with a policy that no longer existed. I am Lark Dean née Whitmore, and I am 41 years old. I grew up in the Kaneowa Valley in West Virginia, and I have lived on the Dean family farm for the 9 years of my marriage, managing the farm's finances and administrative operations with the same attention I brought to everything I managed. Before I came to the farm, I had worked as a bookkeeper for a small agricultural supply company in Charleston, where I had spent 3 years learning agricultural financial administration from the inside, the specific seasonality of agricultural cash flow, the way equipment financing interacts with crop cycle timing, the premium renewal dates that have hard deadlines and whose lapse has hard consequences that are not obvious until the moment of the claim that cannot be filed because the policy lapsed 3 weeks earlier. I had watched this happen to a client of the company's in my second year, a farmer who had a gap in his crop insurance coverage that he was not aware of, that had occurred because he had assumed a renewal had processed when it had not, and who filed a claim after a hail event and discovered the gap in the worst possible way. I had watched the administrative mechanics of that discovery, and I had decided, in the specific way that a 26-year-old bookkeeper decides a thing she will never allow to happen. This does not happen on any operation I manage. I brought this decision to the Dean farm 9 years ago, and I have maintained it without exception, where I had learned the specific discipline of agricultural financial administration, the seasonal cash flow, the equipment financing cycles, the insurance renewals that have hard deadlines and whose lapse has hard consequences. I brought these habits to the Dean farm. I organized the farm's accounts. I set up the renewal calendar. I tracked every policy's billing cycle and every premium payment and every confirmation letter, and I filed them in the pale green binder with the tabbed sections that I had built over 9 years from a system that had been, before I arrived, a collection of documents in a cardboard box on a shelf in the back of the farm office. The pale green binder has 7 tabs. Building the binder took about 2 weeks in my first year of managing the farm's administrative affairs. I took the cardboard box that had been the previous system and organized every document by category, renewal date, and relationship to other documents, and built the tabbed structure. Garrett watched me do this over several evenings at the kitchen table and said, at the end, "I should have done that years ago." I said, "Yes." He said, "Will you run this going forward?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Good." He meant it as a genuine, permanent delegation. He delegated the farm's insurance administration to me in that conversation and did not take it back. For 9 years, I managed it without asking him for input because the delegation was genuine and the management was mine. The quarterly review was always mine. The renewal calendar was always mine. The confirmation letters in tab 7 were always mine. The lapse notice in October was mine to find and act on. The reinstatement application was mine to complete. The beneficiary designation field on the reinstatement application was mine to fill out. The decision to name myself as primary beneficiary was mine, made in the practical way of someone who has managed an operations insurance administration for 9 years and understands that the correct beneficiary for a life insurance policy on a working farm spouse is the surviving working farm spouse Who will be the one managing the farm and servicing its debts after the other spouse is gone? The decision was legally correct, administratively correct, and practically obvious. I made it. I filed it. I received the confirmation. I dated it and initialed it and placed it in tab 7. Tab 1, crop and equipment insurance. Tab 2, vehicle and liability. Tab 3, health and dental. Tab 4, life insurance, Lark. Tab 5, life insurance, Garrett. Tab 6, premium payment register. Tab 7, correspondence and confirmations. The binder is approximately 2 inches thick. It contains 9 years of organized insurance administration. Phil Dean had never asked to see it. It had simply been there in the farm office, doing its work in the organized manner I had built for it to do its work in. The lapse had been a billing error, not a mistake on our part, but a failure in the insurer's billing system that had resulted in a premium statement not being generated for a quarterly cycle. The missed statement had been followed by a lapse notice, which I had caught in the routine review of the billing register that I conducted each quarter. I had called the insurer's customer service line. I had explained the situation. I had been told that the policy could be reinstated if I completed the reinstatement application and submitted the outstanding premium within the reinstatement window. I had done this. The reinstatement application included a section for beneficiary designation, and I had updated the designation: primary beneficiary, Lark Dean, spouse. I had sent the completed application with the outstanding premium. The confirmation letter had arrived on a Thursday afternoon in October, while my daughter was coming home from kindergarten orientation, and I had read it and dated it and initialed it and filed it in tab 7 of the pale green binder. West Virginia Code Section 33-1511 governs the effect of beneficiary designations on life insurance policies. When a policy lapses and is subsequently reinstated, the reinstatement is treated as a new policy issuance, and the beneficiary designation on file at the time of reinstatement controls. I had updated the designation at reinstatement. The designation named me as primary beneficiary. Under the statute, the premarital designation, Phil's document, the one on my kitchen table, was a record of a policy that had lapsed and been superseded. It did not exist anymore. The policy that existed was the reinstated policy, and the reinstated policy named me. Bram Whitmore, my older brother, was at the table. I had called him the morning Phil had told me he was coming. Bram is 46, a retired sheriff's deputy from Kanawha County, and he has the specific quality of retired law enforcement officers who worked investigations. He is very still in difficult situations and very present, and he says nothing unless what he has to say is useful. He had driven to the farm that afternoon and had been sitting at the table when Phil and Ginny arrived. Ginny Dean sat across from Bram and held her coffee cup with both hands and did not speak during the conversation. Phil presented his document and his case. Bram watched Phil. He did not say anything. He was simply there. Have you ever known the answer to a question before it was asked? Not in an abstract way, in the specific, documented way of someone who has the correct paperwork in a binder in the next room, while someone else is presenting incorrect paperwork at the kitchen table. I let Phil finish. I let him present the policy, explain the beneficiary designation, describe Garrett's intentions as he understood them. I let him say what he had come to say in the gentle and final tone of someone who believes they are delivering information that was already determined. I let him finish. Then I got up from the table and walked to the farm office and took the pale green binder from the shelf and walked back to the kitchen table and sat down and opened it to tab 5. The reinstatement confirmation letter is on the insurer's letterhead. It states, policy number, reinstated, effective date, beneficiary designation updated per attached form. The attached form shows primary beneficiary, Lark Dean, spouse. The date of reinstatement is 3 years before Garrett's death. The date of the original premarital policy is before our wedding. The sequence is clear: original policy, lapse, reinstatement with updated designation. The premarital designation was superseded at reinstatement. Phil's document was a record of something that no longer existed. I placed the confirmation letter on the table beside Phil's policy document. I let him read it. He read it twice. He looked at the date. He looked at the beneficiary designation. He looked at Ginny. She was still looking at her coffee cup. He looked at Bram. Bram looked back. Phil said nothing. He picked up his policy document and replaced it in the envelope and stood up. Ginny stood up. I showed them to the door. Phil had not said anything after reading the confirmation letter, and he did not say anything at the door, and he drove home to the farm's main house in the vehicle he had arrived in. And that was the end of the kitchen table conversation. Phil retained an attorney the following week. I understood this before it happened because I understood how Phil thought, and I understood that the gap between what he had expected and what the documentation said would require a formal process before it could be accepted. His attorney sent a formal letter arguing that the premarital designation should control on equitable grounds, that Garrett had intended for the policy to benefit his parents, and that the reinstatement and beneficiary change had occurred without Garrett's involvement, and that equity should restore the original designation. The equitable argument was the only argument available because the statutory argument was closed. The statute was clear. My attorney, a woman named Selena Branch, who practiced insurance and estate law in Charleston, responded by requesting the complete policy file from the insurer. Selena is 48 years old and has practiced insurance and estate law in Charleston for 19 years. She reviewed the claim withdrawal demand and said, "They're arguing equity over statute. That doesn't work when the statute is clear." She said the reinstatement is treated as a new policy issuance under WV Code, Section 33-1511. The beneficiary designation on file at reinstatement controls. The filing I have in hand shows your name. We request the complete policy file and the claim resolves itself. She requested the file. Rhea Coulter at the insurer produced it in 48 hours. The withdrawal followed 18 days later. Rhea Coulter is the claims specialist at the insurer who processed the documentation request. She is 54 years old and has been handling claims for 21 years. And she produced the file with the efficiency of someone for whom this is a routine request: the reinstatement application, the signed beneficiary change form, the confirmation letter with the date and the policy number, the premium payment register showing continuous coverage from reinstatement forward. Selena Branch reviewed the file and responded to Phil's attorney's letter by citing the statute and the documentation. Under WV Section 33-1511, the analysis was not ambiguous. The designations on file at reinstatement controlled. The file showed my name. The file showed the date. The file showed the signed beneficiary change form in my handwriting. Phil's attorney withdrew the claim in 18 days. The insurer processed the death benefit. The figure was $310,000. Selena Branch called me when the processing was complete. She said, "It's been processed. The payment will arrive within 5 business days." I said, "Thank you." She said, "I'm sorry for your loss." I said, "Thank you." She said, "You had good records." I said, "I always have good records." She said, "I know. I could tell from the file. I used the benefit in the way that made the most sense for the farm." The decision took about an hour, not because it was complicated, but because I wanted to be deliberate. I had a figure, and I had a list of the farm's financial obligations, and I arranged them in order of cost-benefit. And the answer was clear. Eliminate the high-interest debt service. Establish the reserve. The equipment financing was carrying an average of 6.5% interest across the 2 notes. Paying them off saved $8,000 per year in interest and debt service combined. The reserve gives the farm a 2-year operational cushion. Together, these 2 decisions change the farm's financial trajectory in a way that Garrett and I had discussed for years and had not been able to implement because the resources were not there. They are there now. The farm is in the best financial shape it has been in since before I arrived 9 years ago. I paid off the equipment financing, the tractor financing that had been on a 5-year note and that had 2 years remaining, and the grain handling equipment that had been on a 3-year note and that had 18 months remaining. Combined, the payoff eliminated approximately $8,000 per year in debt service. I set aside 2 years of operating reserve, the amount that would allow the farm to manage 2 consecutive difficult crop years without the cash flow pressure that had been a background stress in the farm's operation for the entirety of Garrett's tenure. The reserve is in a dedicated account separate from the operating accounts, drawing interest available only for specific categories of operational need that Selena and I identified when we established it. This is how Garrett would have wanted it used. I know this because I knew Garrett, and because I found a note in his handwriting 6 months later, paper clipped to the reinstatement confirmation letter in tab 7. The note was undated. It had been placed in the binder, placed there by Garrett, in the tab 7 section, at some point after the confirmation letter arrived. I had not seen it before because it had been behind the confirmation letter, beneath a subsequent piece of correspondence I had filed on top. I found it when I was reorganizing tab 7 in the autumn after the proceedings concluded. The note said, "Good catch. You're better at this than I am." I do not know when he wrote it. I do not know if he knew when he wrote it what it would eventually mean. But he had found the confirmation letter, and he had understood what it meant, and he had written a note and tucked it behind the letter, and it had waited there in the pale green binder until I found it. Phil and Ginny came for Thanksgiving. I invited them. There was a period in the months following the withdrawal of the claim when I was uncertain whether the farm's relationship with Phil and Ginny could be maintained at a level of functional normality. And I decided that the question would be answered by what I chose to do, not by what had happened. I chose to invite them. They came. Ginny sat at the same kitchen table and held her coffee cup the same way. Phil ate the meal and spoke about the farm and the crops and the things that farmers speak about at Thanksgiving. He did not bring any paperwork. I did not leave any on the table. We had the meal. We did not discuss any of it again. That is the shape of it now. Thanksgiving and the occasional farm coordination call and the specific managed distance of people who have had a proceeding between them and have chosen, on both sides, to maintain a functional relationship across it. I do not know what Phil's internal accounting of the situation looks like. I know what the pale green binder's accounting looks like because I keep it and I organized it. And the tab 7 section now contains the claim withdrawal notice beside the confirmation letter beside the note in Garrett's handwriting. They are filed in chronological order. They are the record. Have you ever caught something so small, a missing invoice, a billing statement that did not arrive, and understood in the moment of catching it that the small thing could become a large thing if you looked away? I caught the lapse notice on a Tuesday morning in October, 3 years before Garrett died. I was conducting the quarterly review of the billing register, the register I update every quarter, reconciling the insurer's billing against our payment records, confirming that every premium has been paid, and every confirmation received, and every renewal processed. The quarterly review takes approximately 2 hours, and has, in 9 years of conducting it, never produced a finding that required immediate action. This Tuesday was the exception. The lapse notice was in the insurer's correspondence file, which I review as part of the quarterly audit. It was a standard form, the kind of letter that insurance companies generate automatically when a premium cycle is missed, a brief document stating that the policy had lapsed as of a specific date and could be reinstated within the designated reinstatement window if the outstanding premium and a completed reinstatement application were received before the window closed. The letter had been generated because the insurer's billing system had failed to produce a statement for that quarter's premium, and the absence of a statement had not been followed up on. The insurer's error, technically. The consequence, mine and Garrett's, if the lapse stood. I called the insurer's customer service line that morning. I described the situation. The representative confirmed that the billing error had occurred on the insurer's side, and that the policy was eligible for reinstatement within the standard window. She sent me the reinstatement application by email. The application contained, in Section 4, a beneficiary designation field. The instructions read, "Please review and update your beneficiary designation at reinstatement." The current designation was listed on the accompanying summary. Phil and Ginny Dean, primary beneficiaries. Premarital, 9 years old. I completed the application. I filled out the beneficiary designation field. I named Lark Dean, spouse, as primary beneficiary. I wrote a check for the outstanding premium. I mailed both. The confirmation letter arrived 12 days later, on a Thursday afternoon, while my daughter was coming home from kindergarten orientation, the bus pulling up at the end of the farm road, with its amber lights blinking, and my daughter stepping off with the focused expression of a child who has spent a morning in a new environment and is processing the information. I opened the confirmation letter at the kitchen table while she ate her afternoon snack. The confirmation stated policy number, reinstated, effective our date, beneficiary designation updated per attached form. I read the confirmation, dated it, initialed it, and placed it in tab 7 of the pale green binder. I told Garrett that evening that I had taken care of the billing issue. He said, "Good catch." He went back to the equipment manual he had been reading. That was the whole of it at the time. A quarterly audit, a lapse notice, a phone call, a completed form, a check, a confirmation letter, a dated and initialed document in tab 7. 9 years of farm administration had built the habit, and the habit had done its work in a Tuesday morning. The work it eventually did 3 years later, on the day Phil placed the original policy on my kitchen table, was the work that any well-maintained record does when the moment requires it. The record was in order. The record spoke. Have you ever considered how many things in your life are working correctly without requiring your attention? And how many of those things were built correctly by someone who gave them the attention they needed at the time? The farm's equipment maintenance schedule works correctly because Garrett maintained it. The vendor relationships work correctly because I maintain them. The insurance renewal calendar works correctly because I built it in my 3rd year of marriage, after I discovered the previous system's gaps, and have maintained it without exception since. The pale green binder works correctly because I organized it, and tabbed it, and kept it current, and did the quarterly review every quarter, including the Tuesday in October 3 years before Garrett's death, when the review found a lapse notice. And I called the insurer and completed the reinstatement application and updated the beneficiary designation and filed the confirmation letter in tab 7. I am telling you this because the account of the kitchen table confrontation and the claim withdrawal is easy to understand as a legal story, a document, a statute, a withdrawal. What is harder to understand without the background is what produced the document. The document was produced by 9 years of quarterly reviews, by the habit of checking, by the discipline of filing the confirmation letter rather than leaving it on the desk until it was misplaced, by the specific professional training of a bookkeeper who had watched a farmer discover a lapse in the worst possible way, and had decided at 26 that this would not happen on any operation she managed. That decision was the foundation of the pale green binder. The pale green binder was the foundation of the confirmation letter. The confirmation letter was the foundation of the document that Phil could not argue against. I think about Garrett's note often. I've been thinking about it since the autumn I found it, paper-clipped behind the confirmation letter in tab 7. In the handwriting I would recognize anywhere, the compact, practical cursive of a man who spent his days in physical work, and whose handwriting had the efficiency of someone who writes only when he has something specific to say. Good catch. You're better at this than I am. He had found the confirmation letter at some point, found it while looking for something else in the binder, perhaps, or found it specifically because some part of him had wanted to look at it, to understand what the administrative event of the reinstatement had produced. He had read the confirmation. He had understood what the updated beneficiary designation meant. He had written the note and paper-clipped it to the letter and filed it back in its place without mentioning it to me, in the specific way that Garrett expressed appreciation through evidence, through the small private acknowledgement attached to the thing he was acknowledging, placed where it would eventually be found by the right person at the right time. He was right. I am better at this than he was. Not better in a general sense. Garrett was better than I was at most of the things the farm required. He understood soil and weather and machinery and the specific rhythms of an agricultural operation in ways that I have been learning slowly and incompletely in the years since his death. He understood those things in the way that people understand things they have done since childhood, with the body knowledge that no amount of reading produces. I understand financial administration. I understand insurance renewals and billing cycles and the quiet work of making sure the records are correct. That is a different kind of knowledge, and it produces different kinds of results. The result it produced, in this case, was a confirmation letter in tab 7 of the pale green binder that Phil had not known to look for, that I had known to place there, that Selena Branch confirmed at the insurer's records department, and that Phil's attorney reviewed and could not argue against. I want to describe what the farm looks like on the morning I am writing this account in my mind, because a story that takes place on land should be able to locate itself in the land. The Kanawha Valley in early summer has a specific quality of morning that I've been trying to name for 9 years without fully succeeding. It is something about the light through the river valley fog, the way the fog holds in the low ground until mid-morning and then lifts in stages, revealing the tree lines and the fields in sequence, so that the view from the kitchen window changes every few minutes between 7 and 9. I make coffee and look at this. I have looked at this every morning for 9 years, through the ordinary mornings and the difficult ones, through the 3 weeks after Garrett died when I stood at the kitchen window with a mug of coffee and could not account for why the farm looked the same when everything about it was different. The farm did not know Garrett had died. The fields were the same fields. The equipment was in the same positions in the equipment shed. The pale green binder was on the shelf in the farm office. Everything was where it was supposed to be, except Garrett, and the farm did not register Garrett's absence in any way that the farm could show me. Only I registered it, standing at the kitchen window with a cooling mug of coffee, watching the fog lift from the river valley fields. 3 weeks after the funeral, Phil came to the kitchen table with his envelope. By that point, I had processed the most urgent administrative matters: the death certificate notifications, the bank account notifications, the farm's insurance notifications, the equipment financing notifications. These had taken the 3 weeks in the specific way that administrative work takes the time it takes, regardless of what else is happening. The forms do not know about the grief. The deadlines do not know about the grief. And the grief does not stop the deadlines. I had processed the notifications in the order of their deadlines, and I had been at the kitchen table when Phil arrived with his envelope, because I had been reviewing the estate attorney's correspondence when I heard his truck in the farm road. I had known from the way the truck stopped that this was not a pastoral visit. I said earlier that Phil was not a cruel man. I want to expand on this because cruelty is a simple category and Phil is not simple. He loved Garrett. He managed this farm for 40 years before he handed it to Garrett, and his mother retired to the farmhouse's smaller rooms to let Garrett and me have the space. He built what Garrett inherited and what I have been maintaining. and will continue to maintain after Phil is no longer here to have opinions about it. He came to the table with the original policy because he had promised himself, sometime in the years since Garrett's parents had been named as primary beneficiaries, that the money would stay in the Dean lineage if anything happened to Garrett. He had made that promise to himself at a time when there was no pale green binder, at a time when the insurance administration was the previous system with the gaps, at a time before I had come to the farm and organized the records and put the renewal calendar on the wall of the farm office. He had made the promise at a time when the world of the farm was the world he understood, before it changed in the ways that 9 years of a new administrator changed things without anyone announcing the changes. He had come to the table with the original policy and the conviction of a man who had not checked the current state of the record. That is not cruelty. That is the consequence of assuming you know the record without reading it. The record had changed. The record is always the authority. The pale green binder was on the shelf in the farm office, and the tab 7 section contained the document that superseded Phil's conviction, and I placed the document on the table. And that was the end of the claim. The warm yellow light of the Kaneowa Valley in late summer comes into the kitchen through the window above the sink. I have made dinner in this kitchen for 9 years. I will make dinner in it for however many more years I manage this farm. When my daughter is old enough to manage it, if she chooses to, which I will not require, I will show her the pale green binder. I will show her the tabs and the sections and the quarterly review process and the renewal calendar on the wall of the farm office. I will tell her about the Tuesday morning in October when I found the lapse notice and called the insurer and completed the reinstatement application and updated the beneficiary designation. I will tell her that the administrative work is not separate from the farm. It is part of the farm. The same way the soil preparation is part of the farm and the equipment, maintenance, is part of the farm. It is the invisible part. It does not produce anything you can see from the road, but it is what makes the rest of it possible. And it is what I have been building for 9 years. And it will be here for whoever comes after me. Garrett's note is in tab 7. I have not moved it. It is paper clipped to the confirmation letter in the order it was found. The letter, then the note, then the article, with the dog-eared page and the underlined sentence, someday. He wrote someday in the margin, and the someday arrived from an insurance policy that had been correctly administered by the same person who had been quietly managing everything correctly for 9 years without announcing it. That is how I want to be understood, if any of this is to be understood. Not as someone who outmaneuvered Phil Dean, which is too small a frame for what happened. As someone who did the work correctly, consistently without announcement, and found that the correct work was waiting for her when she needed it. The benefit funded the equipment financing payoff and the operating reserve. I want to be specific about what the operating reserve means for the farm, because the abstract phrase does not convey the concrete reality. An operating reserve of 2 years means that the farm can absorb 2 consecutive difficult crop years, poor yields, adverse weather, price collapses, without the cash flow pressure that forces short-term decisions that are wrong for the farm's long-term health. For the 9 years of my marriage, The farm had been one adverse event away from the kind of financial pressure that makes it impossible to think clearly about the next 5 years. The reserve changes that. The reserve means that I can make decisions about the farm's operations on a 5-year horizon instead of a quarterly one, which is the horizon that agricultural land deserves and that good farm management requires. Garrett would have wanted this. I am certain of this because I knew Garrett, and because I found, alongside his note in tab 7, a copy of an article he had printed about operating reserve practices in agricultural operations. He had dog-eared the page about 2-year reserves. He had underlined a sentence that said, "A farm with a 2-year operating reserve can make long-term decisions. A farm without one is always making short-term ones." He had written in the margin, in the same compact cursive, "Someday." He had been planning for this. He had not had the resources to achieve it during his lifetime. The resources arrived from an insurance policy that he had told his father would come back to the family, meaning the farm and the people on it, which was the right meaning, which was what happened. Bram was still at the table when I came back from the farm office with the binder. He had been watching Phil during Phil's presentation, watching the way a retired sheriff's investigator watches someone making a statement, which is with the focused and neutral attention of someone who is listening not only to the words, but to the manner of their delivery and what the manner implies. When I placed the binder on the table and opened it to tab 5, Bram looked at the confirmation letter and then looked at Phil. He said nothing. He does not say unnecessary things. What his presence said, the simple fact of being in the kitchen when Phil arrived, of being a large and quiet man who had spent his career in law enforcement and who was sitting at the table when a claim was being made, said what it needed to say without words. Phil looked at the confirmation letter. Phil looked at Bram. Phil picked up his envelope. Phil left. Selena Branch called me 3 days after Phil's attorney withdrew the claim. She said, "I wanted you to know that I reviewed the complete policy file. The documentation was impeccable." I said, "I try to keep good records." She said, "It showed." She said, "I'm sorry for your loss." I said, "Thank you." She said, "He must have been a good farmer." I said, "He was. The best I've seen. There are things I want to tell you about the farm that are not strictly part of the legal account. The account is accurate but incomplete without them. The farm is in the Kanawha Valley, which is a specific geography in West Virginia. River bottom land, sheltered by hills, with a quality of light in certain seasons that is warmer and more diffuse than the surrounding country. I came to it as Garrett's wife, and have remained as Garrett's widow and as the farm's sole operator, which are different relationships to the same land. When Garrett was alive, the farm was jointly managed. He made operational decisions, and I made financial and administrative decisions, and we consulted each other on the boundary cases. Since Garrett died, I make all the decisions. It is a different kind of work, more solitary, and solitary work has a specific quality that shared work does not. I have managed this transition with the same systematic attention I brought to the farm's financial administration for 9 years, updated the operating procedures, renegotiated the vendor contracts that had accumulated during the estate proceeding, filed the tax return, managed the equipment maintenance schedule, updated the insurance renewals, which I have managed on a strict calendar since my 3rd year of marriage, when I discovered that the previous system had been producing occasional gaps. I put the gaps on a calendar and eliminated them. That was the same system that caught the lapse on Garrett's life insurance policy and produced the pale green binder and the tab 7 confirmation letter that Phil did not know about when he arrived at my kitchen table. Phil arrived with conviction. I want to be precise about this because precision matters. He was not calculating in the sense of deliberate malice. He was operating from a genuine belief that the original policy remained operative, that Garrett had told him the money would come back to the family. He had not called ahead. He had not asked whether the policy was still the same policy. He had arrived with his conviction and his document, in the manner of someone delivering settled information. What Garrett had told him. I have thought about this in the farm mornings when there is time to think carefully. I believe Garrett said something about the life insurance in the general, reassuring way of a son telling his father, "Don't worry, the family will be taken care of." I believe he said it in the vicinity of a conversation about mortality and continuity, without specifying that the policy had changed or that the beneficiary designation now named me. Phil had received this statement and held it and arrived at my kitchen table 3 weeks after the funeral, not knowing that the policy had been reinstated with a new designation. Because Garrett had not known the details either. I had managed the reinstatement. I had told Garrett I had taken care of the billing issue. He had said, "Good catch." He had not known, when he said it, what the catch would eventually mean. He had found out when he went looking in the binder at some point afterward and had paper-clipped the note I found 6 months after his death, which said, "Good catch. You're better at this than I am." I have thought about that note more than I have thought about Phil's kitchen table visit. The visit is resolved. The note is permanent. It was his acknowledgement, brief and specific in the way Garrett acknowledged things, attached to the evidence of the thing he was acknowledging, filed in the correct tab of the pale green binder, waiting for me to find it in the autumn after everything had been settled. He saw the confirmation letter, and he understood what it meant, and he wrote the note and paper-clipped it, and filed it back in tab 7 and closed the binder and went on with the day. He always went on with the day. He was that kind of person. He expressed appreciation through specific acknowledgement. He said, "Good catch. You're better at this than I am." And he was right. And I am glad he knew it, and I am glad he wrote it down. The legal resolution was clean. Selena Branch confirmed the documentation. Phil's attorney reviewed the statute. The claim was withdrawn in 18 days. Rhea Coulter at the insurer processed the death benefit. $310,000. The equipment financing, the tractor note with 2 years remaining, the grain handling equipment with 18 months remaining, was paid off within the month. The operating reserve was established. 2 years of operating capital in a dedicated account separate from the operating accounts, available for specific categories of operational need that Selena and I identified when we established the reserve structure. The farm is in better financial shape now than it was before the settlement. That is not how I expected this to go in the days after Garrett died. I expected the estate to be the estate, administered correctly and distributed as documented. the farm to continue on its previous financial trajectory. I had not expected the proceeds of a reinstated insurance policy to provide the resources that Garrett and I had been working toward together for 9 years and had not quite reached. The trajectory of the farm is now different, better. The administration of a Thursday afternoon confirmation letter, processed, filed, dated, initialed, placed in tab 7, had changed the farm's financial future. Phil and Ginny came for Thanksgiving. I invited them. There was a period in the autumn when I was not certain the relationship could be maintained, and I decided that the question would be answered by what I chose to do. I chose to invite them. They came. Ginny held her coffee cup the same way she had held it at the kitchen table in the summer. Phil was quieter than he had been before. We ate. We talked about the farm and the crops and the weather. He did not bring any paperwork. I did not leave any on the table. The meal was what meals are, which is the continuation of things. I do not know what Phil and Ginny have concluded about the summer. What I know is that I administered the estate in accordance with what the documents said, and the documents were correct, and the binder is on the shelf in the farm office, organized and labeled and updated, and the pale green binder will be on that shelf for as long as I manage this farm. Dear listeners, if you have ever caught something in a billing cycle, an invoice, renewal notice that no one else was watching, and the catch turned out to matter in ways you did not anticipate when you made it, tell me about it in the comments. Tell me whether the record was there when you needed it. Tell me whether someone arrived at your table with a document from a different version of a thing, and you had the current version in a binder on a shelf in the next room. Tell me where you are listening from. The Kanawha Valley is different in every season, and the binder is on the shelf where it has always been, organized and labeled and ready. The escalation was procedurally clean. Selena Branch retrieved the complete policy file within 48 hours of my attorney's request. She is a claims specialist with 21 years of experience, and she processed the file request with the efficiency of someone for whom this is a routine task, not because policy reinstatement disputes are common, but because documentation requests are. She produced the reinstatement application, the signed beneficiary change form, the confirmation letter with the date and the policy number, and the premium payment register showing continuous coverage from reinstatement forward. She organized them in the sequence that made the story of the policy's history immediately readable. Original policy, lapse, reinstatement application, beneficiary change form, confirmation, continuous coverage. The story the documents told was the story of what had happened, in the order it had happened, with each element dated. Phil's attorney read the story. He understood what the statute said about it. He filed the withdrawal. I was in the farm office when Selena Branch called to confirm the processing. I was reviewing the tab 1 section of the pale green binder, crop and equipment insurance renewals that were coming up in the following quarter. I answered the call. She said, "It's processed. Payment will arrive within 5 business days." I said, "Thank you." She said, "You had good records." I said, "I always have good records." She said, "I could tell from the file." She said goodbye, and I returned to the tab 1 review and completed it and filed the renewal notes and put the binder back on the shelf. Bram drove back to Charleston the evening after Phil left. He called me that night from the road. He said, "You okay?" I said, "Yes." He said, "You had everything in order." I said, "I did." He said, "I know. I noticed." He said it in the tone he uses when he is noting something he has already decided does not require elaboration. He drove on. I went to bed. The farm was quiet. The binder was on the shelf. The confirmation letter was in tab 7. Everything was in order. Everything had always been in order. That was the whole of it. The equipment is paid off. The operating reserve is established. The farm has a 2-year horizon instead of a quarterly one, which is what Garrett had underlined in the article he had printed and dog-eared, which was what the someday in his handwriting in the margin meant, which arrived not the way he had imagined it arriving, but arrived nonetheless. Funded by the correct administration of a Thursday afternoon in October when a billing confirmation came in the mail and I dated it and initialed it and placed it in tab 7. The morning light is still the morning light. The fog still lifts in stages from the river valley fields. The kitchen window still shows the same sequence of tree lines and fields as the fog clears every morning between 7 and 9. I stand at the window with my coffee the same way I have stood at it for 9 years, and will stand at it for however many mornings more, and the farm is the farm, and the binder is on the shelf, and Garrett's note is in tab 7. Thank you for listening. Stay with Lena. We have more of these.